The wind, a mournful coyote's howl made manifest, whipped dust devils across the forsaken main street of Redemption Creek. It was a name that tasted like ash and broken promises in the mouth of Silas Thorne, bounty hunter. His duster, the color of desert twilight, billowed around his lean frame as he dismounted. His movements economical, his eyes pale, chilling chips of winter ice, sweeping the dilapidated facades. Mayor Gideon Blackwood and his council, a collection of men whose soft hands and shifty gazes bespoke lives of comfortable corruption, awaited him on the warped porch of the town hall. "Mr. Thorne," Blackwood began, his voice unctuous, "we hear you're the man to find those who wish to remain lost." A poorly rendered sketch was produced, a caricature of villainy meant to depict one Elias Vance. "A dangerous man," one councilman added, his jowls quivering. "Murder, theft, a blight on our peaceful community." Silas took the poster, his gaze lingering not on the crude drawing but on the hefty sum printed beneath it. His face, a roadmap of harsh trails and harder choices, remained unreadable. He'd seen 1,000 such posters, heard 1,000 such tales. This was just another job, another name, another weight on a soul already burdened. Or was it, as he pocketed the advance, a cold knot tightened in his gut, a premonition as bitter as the ever-present dust? Could this dusty, forgotten town, with its sanctimonious leaders and whispered fears, hold a truth more dangerous than any outlaw he'd ever hunted? Could this be the job that finally defined him, for good or ill? Silas Thorne was a creature of shadow and instinct, his tracking skills honed by years spent navigating the treacherous borderlands between civilization and savagery. He left Redemption Creek without a backward glance, the council's parting words of feigned gratitude echoing hollowly in the vast, indifferent landscape. The trail of Elias Vance was not the brutal, careless path of a hardened killer. It was faint, almost apologetic, leading away from the desperate clutches of the town towards the stark beauty of the whispering canyons. Silas moved with the patience of a seasoned predator, but what he found at the end of that trail was not a beast in its lair. Instead, nestled by a ribbon of impossible green where a spring wept life into the arid earth, stood a small, meticulously kept cabin. Smoke, thin and fragrant with pinyon, curled from its stone chimney. For hours, Silas watched from a rocky outcrop, his spyglass a cold extension of his will. He saw a man, Elias Vance, whose movements were gentle, almost scholarly, as he tended a small patch of tenacious vegetables. He saw him sit by the cabin window, a book open in his lap, his brow furrowed in concentration, not malice. Through the glass, Silas glimpsed children's drawings pinned to the rough-hewn wall, vibrant splashes of improbable joy in that desolate place. A deer, bold and unafraid, approached the cabin, and Elias spoke to it in soft tones, offering a handful of greens. A pang, sharp and unexpected, pierced Silas. It was the ghost of an old failure, the memory of another innocent wrongly judged, a life he had been too late to save. This man, this quiet scholar of the rocks and sky, bore no resemblance to the fiend described by Blackwood. The sun bled crimson across the western mesas when Silas finally descended, his boots making little sound on the sandy soil. He moved like a phantom, appearing at the cabin door as Elias was stirring a simple pot over his small fire. Elias Vance did not startle, did not reach for a weapon. He simply turned, his eyes, the color of warm earth, holding a profound weariness, yet no fear. "You're from the town," he stated, his voice calm, tinged with a resignation that spoke volumes. Silas nodded, his hand resting near the butt of his Colt, a habit ingrained deeper than thought. "They say you're a murderer, a thief." Elias slowly shook his head, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "They say many things in Redemption Creek, most of them tailored to suit the ambitions of men like Gideon Blackwood." He gestured to the simple interior of his cabin, the neatly stacked books, the worn but clean blanket on his cot, the fragrant herbs drying from the rafters. "Does this look like the den of a killer, Mr. Thorne, is it?" Silas was taken aback that Elias knew his name or perhaps simply his profession. "Blackwood wants this land," Elias continued, his gaze drifting to the window, towards the bubbling spring. This water is life in these parts, more precious than gold. He's tried to buy it to scare me off. When that failed, well, a dead outlaw can't claim rightful ownership, can he? Silas listened, his expression like granite, but behind the impassive mask, a silent battle raged. The sincerity in Elias's voice, the quiet dignity of his poverty, stood in stark contrast to the council's greedy eyes and the weight of their coin in his pocket. That night, Silas did not bind Elias. He accepted the offered bowl of thin stew, eating in silence by the dying embers of the fire while Elias read from a tattered volume of poetry, his voice a quiet murmur against the vast stillness of the desert. The bounty hunter claimed the spot by the door, ostensibly to guard his prisoner, but in truth he was guarding his own fracturing certainty. Sleep was a luxury he rarely afforded himself, and tonight it was an impossibility. The face of the boy he had failed, years ago, flickered in the firelight, an innocent caught in the crossfire of someone else's greed, a life extinguished because Silas had believed the wrong voices. The bounty offered by Redemption Creek was substantial, enough to buy him a measure of peace, perhaps a small ranch far from the blood and dust. But what was peace if bought with the currency of a lie, with the life of a man like Elias Vance? He pulled out the crude poster, studying the monstrous face depicted there, then glanced at the sleeping scholar, his features softened by the moonlight filtering through the window, an expression of gentle repose on his face. The contrast was a physical blow. The weight of the council's silver in his saddlebags felt like a brand, searing his conscience. He had built a life on a code, harsh but clear. He brought men to justice, not to slaughter. But what if justice itself had been bought and sold, twisted into a weapon by the corrupt? The wind soughed around the small cabin, whispering of choices and consequences, of paths diverging in the desolate landscape of a man's soul. As the first pale light of dawn crept over the distant peaks, painting the desert in hues of rose and lavender, Silas Thorne made his decision. He rose, the stiffness in his limbs a familiar companion. Elias was already awake, watching him with those calm, knowing eyes. They lied, Silas stated, his voice raspy, devoid of its usual chilling edge. The words, simple and direct, hung in the air, heavy with implication. A flicker of something surprise, then a dawning, incredulous hope, softened the weariness in Elias's face. "You believe me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Silas merely nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Blackwood and his council want you dead, and they want this land. They won't care if I bring you in alive or dead, as long as you're out of their way. And if I return empty-handed, telling them I made a mistake." He let the sentence hang, the unspoken threat clear. "They will send others." Men less inclined to ask questions, he paused, then continued. "I won't be a party to their thievery or their murder." Elias stared at him, speechless for a moment. The most feared bounty hunter in the territories, a man whose name was a byword for relentless pursuit, was offering not capture, but sanctuary. "Why?" Elias finally managed, his voice thick with emotion. Silas looked away, towards the rising sun. "Let's just say I owe a debt to an innocent man, and I intend to pay it." A new kind of partnership was forged in that moment, not of hunter and hunted, but of two solitary men standing against a tide of corruption, an alliance born of necessity and the unexpected stirring of a hardened conscience. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm of watchful preparation and quiet camaraderie. Silas, drawing on his experience in countless desperate situations, began to fortify the small cabin. He scouted the terrain, noting escape routes and defensive positions, his mind a steel trap of tactical possibilities. Elias, though unversed in violence, proved a surprisingly adept assistant, his quiet intelligence grasping Silas's instructions quickly. They spoke more, Elias sharing stories of his late wife, a botanist who had taught him to love the subtle beauty of the desert's flora. He spoke of his dream to establish a small school for the children of the outlying settlements, children Blackwood and his ilk dismissed as insignificant. Silas listened, his own past remaining a locked vault. Yet a certain understanding, a respect, began to bridge the chasm of their different lives. Elias, sensing the sorrow that lay beneath Silas's stoic exterior, did not pry, but offered instead the solace of shared silence or the distraction of a particularly insightful passage from one of his cherished books. He even convinced Silas to accept a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius, its pages filled with timeless wisdom. Trust, fragile as a desert bloom, began to take root in the arid soil of their shared predicament. They shared meager meals, stood watch in the cold desert nights, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets or the distant call of a night bird. Silas, grimly practical, even began to teach Elias the basics of handling a rifle, knowing that survival might depend on more than just one man's skill. Weeks bled into a month. The sun climbed higher, baking the land, and in Redemption Creek, Gideon Blackwood's patience wore thin. The disappearance of his hired bounty hunter, along with his intended victim, was an affront to his authority, a dangerous loosening of his grip on the town's fear. He could not let it stand. Mutterings of Silas Thorne's betrayal, of his possible collusion with the outlaw Vance, began to circulate, fanned by Blackwood's pronouncements. Finally, fueled by whiskey and greed, he dispatched a posse of his most brutish enforcers, men more accustomed to intimidation than genuine combat, with orders to bring back Vance, dead or alive, and Thorne if he resisted. They thundered up to the small cabin by the spring, expecting to find a cowering scholar, not the steely gaze of Silas Thorne blocking their path, his rifle held with an easy, deadly familiarity. "State your business." Silas's voice cut through the nervous bluster of the posse leader. "We're here for Vance, Thorne. Step aside or you'll hang with him," came the belligerent reply. Silas didn't flinch. "Vance is under my protection. Turn your horses around and tell Blackwood his lies have run their course." A rash movement from one of the men, a hand straying towards a holstered pistol, was all it took. Silas's rifle cracked once, the shot precise, kicking up dust inches from the man's boot. A second shot splintered the pommel of another's saddle. Panic erupted. The posse, cowards at heart, turned tail and fled, one of them nursing a bleeding arm from a ricochet. The message to Blackwood was clear. Silas Thorne had chosen his side. Enraged, the mayor swore a blood oath. Thorne and Vance would both die, and he would burn that cabin to the ground, ensuring no one ever challenged him again. The failed attack galvanized Gideon Blackwood. His public humiliation morphed into a cold, murderous fury. He gathered the townsfolk in the dusty square, his voice thundering from the steps of the town hall, painting Silas Thorne as a traitor who had turned his guns against the very people who had sought his help, a wolf who had allied himself with the sheep he was hired to cull. He spun tales of Vance's supposed depravity, his words preying on their ignorance and their latent greed for the water that Elias controlled. He promised them prosperity once Vance's taint was removed, and soon, a mob armed with rusty shotguns and farm implements was marching towards the spring, their faces grim or fearful, but all driven by the mayor's venomous rhetoric. Under the cover of a moonless night, a lone figure detached itself from the encroaching darkness near the cabin. It was Doc Emmett, the town's elderly physician, his face a mask of guilt and fear. He carried a small satchel of medical supplies and a canteen of fresh water. "Thorne," he whispered urgently, his voice trembling. "Blackwoods roused the whole town. They mean to burn you out, kill you both." Silas met him at the edge of the small clearing, his expression unreadable in the gloom. "Why are you here, Doc?" Doc Emmett wrung his hands. "I knew Elias was innocent. Blackwood, he threatened my practice, my life. But I can't live with this. There's an old mine tunnel behind the spring. It's collapsed in places, dangerous, but it might lead out to the far canyons. It's your only chance." He pressed a rough map into Silas's hand. The gesture, small and fraught with peril for the old man, was a sliver of decency in a world gone mad. The siege was tightening. The air grew thick with impending violence. The first flaming arrow arced through the pre-dawn gloom, thudding into the dry timbers of the cabin roof. More followed, painting grotesque, dancing shadows on the canyon walls. The wood, parched by the relentless desert sun, caught quickly. "Time to go," Silas said, his voice calm amidst the growing chaos, grabbing his rifle and saddlebags. Elias, his face pale but resolute, nodded, clutching the book Silas had been reading. Smoke filled the small space, acrid and choking. They burst from the back of the cabin, heading for the dense thicket that concealed the spring and the mine entrance Doc Emmett had described. Figures emerged from the darkness, Blackwood's men, their faces illuminated by the growing inferno of the burning cabin. Shots rang out, answered by Silas's carefully aimed responses, each one designed to slow their pursuit. They reached the narrow, crumbling opening of the mine tunnel just as Blackwood himself, flanked by his most loyal cronies, appeared at the edge of the clearing. "There they are," he bellowed, his face contorted with hate. "Don't let them escape." Silas shoved Elias towards the tunnel. "Go. I'll hold them." Elias hesitated. "I won't leave you." "That wasn't a request," Silas growled, turning to face their pursuers, his pistols now in hand. The narrow space around the mine entrance became a whirlwind of desperate action. Silas moved with a deadly grace, his shots precise, his focus absolute. He was not just fighting for his life, but for the life of an innocent man, for the tattered remnants of his own honor. One by one, Blackwood's key men fell or retreated, unwilling to face the cold fury in Thorne's eyes. Finally, only Blackwood remained, his bravado deserting him, his eyes wide with terror as Silas advanced, smoke and fury clinging to him like a shroud. The mayor turned to flee, but Silas was faster, tackling him to the ground. "This town's sickness, Blackwood," Silas rasped, his pistol pressed against the mayor's temple. "It ends now." Silas didn't pull the trigger. Killing a disarmed, whimpering coward like Gideon Blackwood would serve no purpose but to lower himself to the mayor's level. Instead, he bound him securely, leaving him for whatever justice or vengeance the desert might mete out, or for the more sober elements of Redemption Creek to find. Though wounded, a burning gash along his arm, Silas followed Elias into the suffocating darkness of the mine tunnel. They stumbled through the collapsing passages, guided by faint glimmers of light and sheer determination, until finally, hours later, they emerged, blinking, into the harsh sunlight of the far canyons, free. In the days that followed, the truth, like the clear water from Elias's spring, began to cleanse Redemption Creek. Doc Emmett, his courage finally ignited, presented evidence of Blackwood's long history of extortion and deceit. Other townsfolk, shamed by their complicity and witnessing the downfall of their corrupt leader, spoke out. Blackwood was eventually brought back, a broken man, to face a different kind of justice, the scorn and judgment of the community he had manipulated. Elias Vance, his name cleared, returned not in triumph but with quiet dignity. His land, and its precious spring, he dedicated to the community, stipulating it be used to support the poorest settlers and the small school he had always dreamed of building. Silas Thorne did not stay. His work was done. As he rode away, the wound on his arm a dull ache, the heavier burden on his soul felt lighter than it had in years. He had faced the darkness, within himself and in the heart of a corrupted town, and had chosen the light. Years turned into decades. Redemption Creek, slowly, painstakingly, lived up to its name. The spring became a symbol of shared prosperity and Elias Vance a beloved teacher and elder. The story of the feared bounty hunter who turned protector, who saw the truth in a good man's eyes and defied a town to uphold it, became a legend whispered around campfires, a testament to the enduring power of courage and the profound meaning of a chosen, righteous path. And so, dear listener, we see that sometimes the true bounty is not on a life, but on the integrity of a soul. What did you think of Silas's ultimate choice and the redemption it brought? We trust this tale has stirred your spirit.